Most people assume that wealthy men sleep well because they have money. But after decades of listening to men in every financial bracket, from those with modest pensions to those with substantial portfolios, I've discovered something far more interesting. It was never the size of the bank account that determined how well a man slept. It was the size of his peace. Some men with millions lie awake at night, gripped by anxiety over market fluctuations, family disputes, or the fear of losing what they've built. Others, with far more modest means, sleep like children, untroubled, unburdened, at rest. So tonight, we explore a question that touches every man who has ever stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., calculating, worrying, wondering. What is the real difference between financial security and financial peace? Epictetus taught something that feels almost radical in our anxious age. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. This single idea unravels most of our modern anxiety about money. We assume security comes from accumulation. The Stoics insisted it comes from alignment, the harmony between what we have and what we actually need. Marcus Aurelius reinforces this, with a piece of nighttime wisdom every senior man should carry to bed. Confine yourself to the present. Most sleepless nights aren't caused by present circumstances. They're caused by replaying the past or rehearsing the future, both of which the Stoics considered forms of self-inflicted suffering. A man who has made peace with his finances doesn't lie awake fixing yesterday's mistakes or fighting tomorrow's uncertainties. He rests because he has done what he could and trusts what he cannot control to unfold as it will. Behavioral researchers have long studied a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, our tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness, regardless of our financial circumstances. This explains why a man earning $40,000 a year in retirement can sleep more soundly than a man managing 7 figures. It was never about the number. It was about whether the man had made peace with his number. There's also something called ego depletion, the mental and emotional exhaustion that comes from constant decision-making, worry, and self-control. Men who spend their days anxiously monitoring markets, comparing themselves to others, or trying to maintain appearances they can't sustain, are depleting themselves long before their head hits the pillow. And then there's loss aversion, our tendency to feel the pain of loss more intensely than the pleasure of gain. A man who has built his identity around net worth often lies awake, not from actual financial danger, but from the psychological threat of any potential decline, however small. The Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances has shown time and again that financial satisfaction correlates far more strongly with spending alignment and debt freedom than with total net worth. In plain language, it's not what you have. It's whether what you have matches what you actually value. Consider 2 retired men, both in their 70s. One has considerable savings, but carries a mortgage on a larger home, monthly payments on a newer car, and a lingering sense that he should be doing more with his money to keep up appearances. The other lives modestly in a paid-off home, drives a car that's 10 years old, and has no debt of any kind. On paper, the first man may appear wealthier, but ask either man how he sleeps, and the answer becomes clear. Debt is not just a financial obligation, it's a psychological tether. It keeps the mind tied to obligations, deadlines, and what-ifs long after the lights go out. The Stoics understood this intuitively. Seneca wrote, "He who has lost his sense of shame has nothing left to lose." I would add a modern parallel. He who has lost his sense of financial urgency has finally found his peace. Another common source of sleeplessness among senior men isn't debt. It's comparison. Watching a neighbor's new boat, seeing a friend's grandchildren attend expensive universities, scrolling through social media, and witnessing other retirees traveling the world while quietly wondering, am I doing enough? Have I saved enough? Am I enough? This is where Maslow's hierarchy of needs becomes relevant. Many men, even in their 70s and 80s, are still unconsciously chasing esteem, external validation, rather than resting in self-actualization, the peaceful acceptance of who they are and what they've built. A wise senior man eventually realizes nobody's approval improves his balance sheet, and nobody's admiration guarantees his peace. Once a man stops measuring his worth against others' appearances, an enormous psychological weight lifts. Real wealth begins where the need to impress ends. Financial peace isn't only about spending and saving, it's about boundaries. Consider the retired man whose adult son repeatedly asks for just one more loan, or the father who feels obligated to co-sign a loan for a struggling relative because saying no feels unloving. Every unprotected boundary becomes another quiet burden carried into the night. Psychologists call this decision fatigue, the cumulative toll of navigating emotionally charged financial requests without clear boundaries. The wise senior man learns to say no without guilt, not because he lacks generosity, but because he understands a Stoic truth. You cannot pour from a well, you allow others to endlessly drain. Protecting his retirement isn't selfish, it's stewardship. And stewardship, unlike people-pleasing, allows a man to close his eyes at night without wondering if he's compromised his own security to satisfy someone else's urgency. Perhaps the deepest reason financially secure senior men sleep well isn't rooted in numbers at all. It's rooted in acceptance. There is profound psychological relief in the moment a man finally says, "I have enough," not because he stopped striving, but because he stopped measuring his life against an ever-moving target. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. This is not resignation. It's wisdom earned through decades of experience. The understanding that peace was never hiding in the next dollar, the next investment, or the next possession. It was always available, the moment he chose to stop chasing and start appreciating. We often think of sleep as simply the absence of activity. But for a senior man, peaceful sleep is the presence of something far more valuable: alignment between his values, his finances, and his daily choices. A quiet bank account is often stronger than a loud lifestyle. A peaceful life is the greatest return on investment. And perhaps most importantly, the richest senior men rarely feel the need to prove they are rich, because their peace has already told them they are. Growing older is not about accumulating more to feel secure. It's about needing less to feel at peace. The senior men who sleep soundly aren't necessarily the wealthiest men in the room. They are the men who have made peace with enough, released what they cannot control, and protected their boundaries with quiet dignity. As Seneca once wrote, "He is greatest who has fewest wants." Perhaps that is the truest measure of financial security. Not the balance in an account, but the stillness in a mind that finally, after decades of striving, has found its rest. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What has helped you find genuine peace with your finances in retirement? Is there a boundary you had to set to protect your peace of mind? What does having enough mean to you today? What's one thing that finally allowed you to sleep better at night? If this video brought you a sense of calm or clarity, consider liking it, subscribing, and sharing it with another senior man who values peace over pressure. Seek wisdom, protect your peace, leave a legacy.